News, KGO San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland. When I bring up legal issues, I like to talk to the experts. I don't like to throw opinions out there or analysis out there because, frankly, I've never studied law. So usually I turn to Brian Bouffard. He's a legal expert. The website is bouffardlaw.com. Good morning. Good afternoon, Brian. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, as always. Let's talk about this Ferguson grand jury case. A lot of people are concerned not only about the district attorney, but the racial makeup of the jury. It consists of 6 white men, 3 white women, 2 black women, and 1 black man. We don't know the ages or the hometowns. Prosecutors convened the grand jury to begin hearing evidence in the case, despite concerns among some, including Michael Brown's parents, that the DA wouldn't be impartial because of Bob McCullough's ties to law enforcement. His father, his mother, and other relatives worked for St. Louis police. His father was killed while responding to a call involving a black suspect. Brian, I have to ask, are the concerns valid?
You know, I'm not prepared to say that they're not valid. You know, the criminal justice system is run by human beings. Human beings have, you know, the fallibilities that we all have, and I think that each one of those concerns, you know, is potentially a very valid concern.
Well, is there bias built into the criminal justice system when it comes to the pool, the jury pool?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer, and I would start by saying, you know, where do they get their jurors, their grand jurors? It's supposed to be, you know, ideally a cross-section of the community that office serves. And the problem can sometimes come in when they are using, let's say, property tax rolls or some other way, you know, driver's licenses, voter registration, some way to obtain that large panel of folks from which the grand jury will be drawn. And sometimes there are valid complaints that type of a selection system inappropriately excludes people, oftentimes minorities, who may not have, I guess, bought into the system as much as some of the other folks who might have registered to vote and gotten their driver's licenses and things like that. So I've heard those complaints, and I think that does indicate, you know, potentially a problem.
I have to ask about the selection process. A lot of people out there are going to find this unbelievable and probably be ticked off at me, but because I've worked in the media and the news media for so long, I've pretty much been excused every time I've been called to the jury selection process. What are some of the questions that they ask?
Oh, I mean, they'll ask all kinds of questions. You know, I'm a Texas lawyer primarily, so you know, I'm used to the system that we have here, and Texas actually uses a system that only one other state uses, that being California, and that's called a key man system, where some specific people are selected, and they can kind of talk to their friends or people that they know and say, hey, you want to be on a grand jury. And so oftentimes you get this cross-section of people who are skewed pretty old, you know, 50s, 60s and up. They oftentimes tend to be white. And, you know, there's been allegations of kind of cronyism that are hard to really dispute.
Well, I have to ask, I mean, do they ask questions? Do they ask racial questions? Do they, I wouldn't say they would ask this, but, I mean, along the lines of, are you racist?
Well, obviously that's something that certainly, not talking about a grand jury, but a regular jury, a pettit jury that's going to hear a case. I mean, those are the kind of questions that we as trial attorneys absolutely want to know.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the grand jury system, at least in Texas and in my experience, they aren't questioned to that extent. In other words, if there's some kind of a person with huge bias or a virulent racist attitude, that person is far more likely to make it onto a grand jury than they would be to get onto a jury to hear an actual trial.
Our guest is Brian Bouffard. He's a legal expert. Brian, we're talking about the Michael Brown case, the 3 black people among the 12-member grand jury hearing evidence in the case, and whether or not the district attorney, Bob McCullough, can impartially prosecute this case. Brian, I heard from Bob McCullough earlier in the week. He was on a local radio show in St. Louis. He said he hasn't heard at all from the governor whether or not he should be removed from this case because of his history of having family in law enforcement, because of the fact that his dad was shot by a black suspect. What, you know, why, I guess if you're taking a look at the first 3 to 4 days of this past week and what's happened, why would you not take every precaution and just remove this guy so there's no doubt?
Well, I totally agree with you, and frankly, he doesn't need the governor to step in and remove him. He could say, hey, because of, all of the facts that have come out in this case, and this is a fairly unique incident, and we've had, a lot of community unrest about this, I'm going to, on my own, recuse myself. I'm going to pull in a special prosecutor to kind of run this show, maybe from, St. Louis proper or someplace, and maybe try to quell some of those concerns. But, on the other hand, I can also see, that would set a precedent where somebody could argue that the DA has to recuse himself in every case because, those personal attributes of his aren't going to just disappear.
What about the decision where the ages in the hometowns of the grand jury makeup haven't been released? Is that usually released? What would go into a judge's decision on whether or not to do that?
That's a great question, and I really don't know the answer. And I'm sure it's a statutory issue in Missouri law, whether or not they can release that information and how they release it. So there's probably nothing about that makes the hairs on my neck stand up as far as not being appropriate.
Yeah, I don't know. I just look at it and think, what's gone, and we already said this, but what's gone on there the past. The first 3 to 4 days of the week, we've had relative calm recently, but just remove all doubt. I mean, just do it, just to be on the safe side. Bring in if the DA doesn't do it, who would they bring in?
Yeah, I mean, they could bring in a prosecutor from any other county in the state if they wanted to. They could bring in somebody from the Attorney General's office. There's all sorts of things that they could do to at least try to quell these concerns. And I think, if you think back to the Rodney King trial, they tried him in Simi Valley, and there were a lot of issues with people concerned about the jury makeup there. And, they obviously got a jury that, at least from the defense perspective, did what they wanted them to do. Yeah. But there was a lot of real concern about that.
Brian Bouffard's our guest. He's a legal expert. BouffardLaw.com is the website. We're talking about the case in Ferguson and whether or not this can be impartially prosecuted. Brian, I'd like to hold you through to the break because I want to ask you what specifically the DA and the grand jury is looking at when they take a look at this case, and I'd also like to take some calls if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right, 415-808-0810 is the number, 808810. KGO News Time is 12:15. We're talking the case in Ferguson and whether or not the district attorney in Ferguson can impartially prosecute this case. Also, the grand jury made up of 3 black jurors, so it's 75% white. A lot of people are saying this is not good. The St. Louis County District Attorney, Bob McCullough, he has issues. A lot of people are calling for him to not prosecute this case because he has a lot of family that was in law enforcement, including his father, who was shot by a black suspect. So is he able to impartially prosecute this case? A lot of questions surrounding it, and our guest right now is Brian Bouffard. He's a legal expert, and the website is BouffardLaw.com. Brian, what is the district attorney looking at as far as this case is involved? Obviously, you have the officer story versus witnesses, but a lot of witnesses have the same story.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. And the DA's job right now is to get past the grand jury if they want this case to be prosecuted at all. I can tell you from personal experience as a defense attorney, the grand jury process is really, it's a speed bump for the prosecution. You probably heard the phrase, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich if they want to, and that's pretty close to being literally true. They're in a room that nobody else can come in. It's the 12 grand jurors. It's the prosecutor. He has a stack of papers. And the format of a grand jury presentation, is essentially, hey, I'm the prosecutor. We've got this case. Mr. Smith got arrested. Here are the facts, according to the police officer. We recommend you indict. And then they vote. And that's really all they hear. There is no provision for a defense presentation at all. So, it's going to start really on a policy level at the DA's office. Do they think that this officer committed a crime, and do they want him to be prosecuted for it?
Brian, I have to ask, what do you make of Attorney General Eric Holder taking a look at the case? I mean, is that unprecedented, and what is he looking for?
No, that's not unprecedented at all. He would be looking at a civil rights violation based on whether or not he thinks that there's evidence that Michael Brown was killed in violation of his civil rights. In other words, his rights to due process as a minority, whether he was targeted because he was black, issues like that. If that can be proven, then potentially the officer committed a federal crime.
Gosh, I'd hate to sit here and pontificate, but based on what we've seen from video from that officer threatening to kill a reporter, I mean, that was caught on tape. That was caught on video, I should say, to the officer's threats to the journalists that have been arrested, to the crackdown. Yeah. I mean, how many cases do you think are going to come out of this thing?
Well, who can say? What I think we can say, and we're kind of dividing ourselves as a country along two lines. I fall down pretty firmly on this side, and that is, I think militarizing the police is a terrible idea. Yeah. We've got this program right now where all sorts of military surplus weapons and gear and vehicles are being provided to police departments, and they're taking them because somebody who's in power, if you offer them more power, they're going to take it. That's kind of the nature of what power is.
Yeah.
And if you start thinking of yourself as an army, then who is the enemy? Well, the citizens that you're sworn to protect and serve. So I think that's precisely what we're seeing when we turn on the TV and see what's going on in Ferguson.
And you had Rear Admiral John Kirby come out this past week. He adamantly defended the program, saying, look, this thing saves lives. I think it's a program with checks and balances, and that's what it is. Yeah, we're going to take a second look at it, but right now that's what it is. And I'm taking a look at the video and saying, is this Syria? Is this Gaza? Or is this happening here in the U.S.? I mean, this is insane.
Yeah, exactly. And I sure would like to know what checks and balances he's talking about, because I'm not aware of any. I think that they apply for it and they get it. What I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about the necessity of every police department of any decent size. I mean, they certainly need a SWAT unit. They need a hostage rescue unit, but we're seeing something far and away above that. You're seeing college campuses with university police departments that have MRAP vehicles. Right. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Hey, Brian, I'd like to take some calls if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, let's go to Mark on line 1. Good afternoon, Mark. What do you think?
I think he should be allowed to prosecute it. The bias is a joke, and by the way, I am a man of color, and I do live in a ghetto neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So, as far as I'm concerned, if you think that way, then what are you going to have, an all-black jury, an all-white jury for white people, an all-Asian jury for Asians? It doesn't make sense.
Hey, Mark, I have to ask, though, I mean, with what happened here the past 3, why not take all precautions? Why not remove all doubt out of everybody's mind?
Because there is no way to remove all doubt. A racist is a racist no matter what race he is, and he's going to have doubts no matter what happens.
Okay.
In this kind of a case, you got a bunch of people watching TV who don't live in a ghetto neighborhood who are saying, hey, let's remove this guy because his father was a cop. Well, you know what? You got to remove me from the human race because I have no racism at all.
Well, you're saying so you're saying a lot of the doubts coming from outside of the community?
Oh, yeah, especially from the news media. I get a kick out of you guys. You can really make a story into a mess by giving out so much information that's false or misleading, or even if you give out the right information, it's still biased.
Have you seen the footage?
I've seen the footage, but I also know what I'd do if somebody hit me in the eye and half-blinded me, and I had a gun. I'd blow him away in a second to save my family.
Well, that story has been if Fox came out with that story. You're talking about the officer, his eye socket collapsing. CNN's come out and said that's false. So which part of the media are you believing? I mean, you're talking about the media.
I follow the middle line. There had to be an injury, because put it this way: Fox is on the right, if CNN's on the left. The news media is totally biased in this country. There's no middle ground anymore.
You're taking the Fox side of it.
No, I'm taking the side where there was an injury.
All right.
I don't know how bad it was, but I'll tell you what. You break into my house, you knock me down, and my family's behind me, you're not going to get out of my house.
Right. Hey, Mark, I appreciate the call. 808810 is the number. Let's go to Mike on line 2. Good afternoon, Mike. What do you think?
Hey, good afternoon. Hey, I want to say the only bias that I'm seeing right now, and I have seen in the last since he's been in office, is Eric Holder. He's the first one to come out and call America a bunch of racial cowards. He's injected race into everything he gets involved in. And how would you like the DA to say, I'm representing this as a white man, like Eric Holder comes down and saying, He's looking at this as a black man. That man is racist. And for the other attorney that you have on the line to come out and say that maybe the Department of Justice should take a look at that, how can that be fair?
Brian,
how can it be fair that the Department of Justice is looking at whether or not there was a civil rights violation?
No. You said basically that there could be bias with the local DA taking, precedent over the case. But how can there not be bias with the Department of Justice?
No, he didn't say that, Mike. He didn't say that.
Yeah, no. What I was saying, Mike,
was he didn't say there was. He said there could be. I mean, it's logical both sides. The DA could be biased, but also Eric Holder could be biased. But for everybody to ignore the things and the way Eric Holder has acted, it's a joke. It's one way, and it's only one way to crucify the whites. Thank you.
Matt,
go ahead, Brian, because I'm not going to argue with an attorney. Go ahead and then hang up and not allow you to defend yourself.
No. I think he must have misheard me. I wasn't necessarily saying that Department of Justice is going to be investigating the DA. I mean, I don't think there's any
right.
There's really no evidence to do that at all at this point that I can see. I think that there may be reason to investigate the police department itself, and certainly the officer who is at the center of this. It's kind of up. What was in his mind is kind of important to the feds on a civil rights claim. So, I wasn't quite.
No, I believe me, Brian, we know. And I'm not going to pick a fight with a lawyer and then hang up and not allow him to defend himself. Brian Bouffard is a legal expert. The website is bouffardlaw.com. Thanks for your time, Brian. We'll talk to you again.
Anytime, Matt. Take care.
Appreciate it. 415-808-0810 is the number, 808810. Coming up, we're talking tech. Are you ready for the Internet of Things? What the heck is that?